In this video, we will uncover the world's most baffling archaeological discoveries. From a 100-year-old mummified girl who still looks alive to a 2.3-meter-long Japanese Dako sword meant for rituals. This video explores history's strangest secrets. Story began a little over 100 years ago. It happened in Italian Palermo. In 1918, Rosalia Lombardo was born, and not having lived 1 week before her second birthday, the girl died of pneumonia. It is clear that the girl simply did not have time to become popular. Everything happened after death. The girl's father was heartbroken. In connection with this, he decided to use the services of the best specialist of that time, Alfredo Salathian. The mummification specialist introduced a special composition of thromoline, chlorine, alcohol, salicylic acid, glycerine, and zinc into the girl's arteries, which saved her circulatory system from decomposition. After this mummification process, the girl was placed in a small glass coffin, and to this day her body is kept in a small church in Palermo. This girl is 100 years old, but she looks like she is still alive. Everyone who saw the mummified girl does not believe that she is not sleeping. Mummification helps the body to be stored for a long time. However, due to the natural decomposition process, the healthy and flesh appearance of the deceased will in any case change. It is impossible to carry out mummification in order to completely preserve the skin tone and eye color as they were in life. As they say, the impossible is possible. Either a miracle happened in our case, or the mummification specialist really had a great talent. And that's not all. Scientists who constantly monitor the girl's body fix weak electrical impulses sent by her brain with a duration of 33 and 12 seconds. Such impulses are characteristic of a living person, although the fact of the death of a girl has been confirmed more than once. Whatever it is, but the mystery of the most living mummy in the world is forcing tourists from all over the world to come to Sicily and personally see a little girl with a yellow bow on her head, who looks like she is still alive. Giant sword in Japan. Japan is famous for its history, and especially the history of ancient swords, which were unusually large. In Tomio Maruyama burial mound, archaeologists found an iron sword Dako, 2.3 meters long. The Dako blade got its name from its wavy serpentine shape. Japanese archaeologists often found such swords in burial graves, and there are already more than 80 such finds, but this sword has its own uniqueness. It is the longest of all that has been preserved in its entirety. It was impossible to use such swords in battle, especially considering the average height of the Japanese. Most likely, the sword was really used only as a variety of ceremonies. The mirror and shields were used as a tool to protect the dead from evil spirits, and a giant sword could enhance such protection. In addition to the sword, a bronze mirror in the shape of a shield was found in the barrel. Although such mirrors were usually round in shape, its dimensions 64 by 31 centimeters, and its weight was almost 6 kilograms. Archaeologists have not yet noticed signs of looting, so they hope they can figure out who is in the clothes coffin and who owns the grave goods. The approximate age of the burial is 307-10 AD. Temple at the bottom of the ocean. We most likely didn't know, but the Roman Empire had its own Las Vegas and it was called Baia. The city was located opposite the Gulf of Pazzoli. At that time it was a very fashionable city, and attracted the attention of wealthy Romans from all over the Roman Empire. There were many luxurious villas, seaside resorts, and a variety of expensive entertainment. There were villas of all famous emperors, Caesar, Nero, Hadrian. Then life was in full swing here. Now the resort has turned into an underwater archaeological park. Marine archaeologists have found an old temple at the bottom of the ocean, which is about 2,000 years old. In addition to the temple, a huge area with ancient structures was discovered. Along the 2-kilometer coastline, mosaics, statues, and almost all buildings were well preserved. Mikhail Stefanillo and his colleagues have been studying the area since they want to create a detailed map of the area, and especially to study the ancient temple. The construction of the temple was carried out not only by local residents, but also by immigrants from Central Asia. In addition to them, Nabatean merchants took part in the construction. These are the people who lived in northern Arabia and the southern Levant. Historians found the first evidence of the Nabatean temple in the inscriptions of the 18th century. All these finds were made possible thanks to archaeologists and divers. We dealt with the river, the seas and oceans too. Now let's move on to studying the pyramids at the bottom of the lake. Mysterious stone pyramids. For the first time, this find was talked about in 2015, and in my first videos on the channel, I most likely even talked about it. Then, at the bottom of Lake Constance, located on the border of Germany, Austria and Switzerland, archaeologists found a chain of 170 stone pyramids. They formed a 20-kilometer strip running parallel to the lakeshore 200 meters from it. Each pyramid had a diameter of 30 meters and a height of about 2. The pyramids are located on a layer of lacustrine deposits, formed after the retreat of the Rhine Glacier more than 10,000 years ago. Now archaeologists have more modern equipment to study ancient objects, especially those located in hard-to-reach places. With the help of an excavator, they excavated one of the pyramids to get to the stone layer. There they also found wood with traces of primitive processing. Thanks to this wood, archaeologists managed to somehow date the pyramids. So far, the use of the pyramids by ancient people has several options. These could be places of worship or some kind of crypts for the burial of people. But perhaps, everything is much simpler. These were ancient houses, or fish traps. The team of archaeologists plans to return to Lake Constance soon to investigate the next stone pyramid. Perhaps this will provide additional information for dating and explaining the functions of the mysterious monuments. We know that archaeologists, quite by accident, can find something insignificant there that can fully explain the origin of the ancient pyramids. Enough underwater finds. Let's better deal with the marriage scam in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptian scam. Archaeologists have found in Egypt one interesting document about a marriage scam. This papyrus is over 2,000 years old. Just imagine. We can now find out what kind of scams men were capable of in relation to their lovers in ancient Egypt. The manuscript is a complaint of the deceived bride Philomena to King Ptolemy, with a request to punish Numenius, who promised to marry. As stated in the text, instead of a wedding, a man simply appropriated the dua of his former lover. As you can see, the history of marriage camps has very long roots. Even then, people used legal tricks and engaged in fraud. So far, we know only about one such case, which has been documented. And how many of them happened in those years, we can only guess. The document was found in Deir el Benet necropolis in the Fayoum oasis. For almost 1,000 years, people were buried here from the 4th century BC to the time of Byzantine Egypt. The manuscript was buried as a material for ritual decorations. The thing is that not everyone could afford to put precious stones and metals in burial places. Therefore, the ancient Egyptians resorted to trickery. They made necklaces from pressed pieces of papyrus, which then they used as an offering to the afterlife. Papyrus was taken most often scribbled. The next find will also be associated with a mass grave, burial with headless skeletons. At the archaeological site of Rebel Valkilhemby in Slovakia, archaeologists have discovered a terrible find. 38 people were buried in one grave, but they were all without a head. The approximate age of the burial is 5000 BC. This site appears to have been the largest early Neolithic settlement in Central Europe. In addition to the burial, the researchers identified 313 houses, 80 of which were inhabited by people at the same time. They formally divided all the buildings into 3 villages. Scientists claim that about 600 people lived in this settlement. One of the villages was surrounded by double ditches, almost 1.5 kilometers long. In this moat, archaeologists found the remains of 38 people, including a child. The bones of the burial were mixed with each other, so archaeologists had to spend a lot of time to separate 38 characters from a huge pile of bones. Interestingly, archaeologists have already found decapitated skeletons in the Vrabelais area, and then they concluded that there was a sacred meaning in such a burial. However, that burial was different from the new one. In the previous case, a separate grave was dug for each person, and in our case, The bodies of 38 people were thrown into one pit and lay at random. But a logical question arises. Where are the heads? In some skeletons, the first cervical vertebrae was found, which means it was not an execution and a sacrifice. The heads were removed systematically and neatly, if one can say so about a human head. And what about the story of the Netherlands, which rests underwater? Little hole ends underwater. Underwater archaeologists have finally managed to determine what kind of ship rests at a depth of 32 meters near the English coast. Until today, this ship has been listed everywhere as unknown ship sunk off Eastberg. Now, after many years of research, it was possible to establish the Bisse's Little Holland. This is a Dutch ship of the 17th century, which was engaged in the transportation of marble. Was built in addition to its intended purpose, the ship participated in all major battles of the Second Anglo-Dutch War. The ship was discovered in 2019, and immediately the ship received the status of a super important find and was provided with the highest level of protection. Studying a 17th century ship allows you into the maritime history of that period. There were treasures on the ship, which will be lifted ashore and, after all stages of study, sent to the museum. The history of shipbuilding in England and the Netherlands is very exciting. After all, these countries created the best ships of that era. In addition to some of the treasures on the ship were cannons, Italian marble and Italian ceramics. Marble had to get to the Netherlands for the construction of prestigious houses. For some, it may not seem like a significant detail to find out the name of the ship, but in fact, this is the most important discovery. Thanks to the many historical records about the ship, historians already have all the information. In this way, it becomes much easier to understand who it belonged to, what it was used for, where it was going, and why it ended up at the bottom. The story of the ship is a real historical fact. But what about ancient Greek myth? Stash in the lost city of myths? It's nice when the ancient city of myths turn out to be a reality and really hides treasures. One of these cities was found by archaeologists in Greece and is called Shadows. Historians had information about this city only on the basis of myths. But if you believe the ancient Greek myths, then the Minotaur must be somewhere as well. Therefore, scientists were skeptical about the ancient Greek texts. During the excavation of the City of Shadows, researchers found several ancient caches with coins, and this no longer looks like myth because the coins are real. An accidental discovery was made by local residents in 1984, when, while digging a well, they stumble upon an ancient sarcophagus. While specialists in the study of official history arrived here, marauders had long known about this place, and partly the ancient city had already been plundered. Either the marauders were not persistent, or the loot was enough of them. The archaeologists still had enough material to further study the city. They found a large public building from the Roman period with complex stonework. During the study of this building, archaeologists found a cache with 18 silver and copper coins, and nearby in another cache there were 2,100 different coins. Their approximate age is 5th-6th century AD. Near the city necropolis, a team of researchers unearthed a Roman burial with an underground burial chamber. Inside it, archaeologists found a 1st century BC coin minted in Corinth, a bronze coin from Athens of the classical period, a lamp depicting the god Ares, a glass incense burner, an urn, a bowl and a lamp, and a child who was buried in the tomb. The most recent mention of the City of Shadows was in an ancient text by the geographer of the 2nd century AD Pausanias. He believed that the city was built by Trojan prisoners of war around November. If there is a real story in the myth of ancient Greece, what about the sagas of the ancient Vikings? Keep watching. Viking Age Double Burial. A unique find was made by archaeologists in 1981 near the village of Gedrup, near the city of Vraskelta in Denmark. The researchers found not just an unusual but a very strange burial by those standards. A woman and a man lay in the grave, but they were buried in completely different ways. The reconstructed burial is today considered the main attraction local museum in Roskilde. The photo shows how huge stones lie on the chest, left arm and legs of a woman, and next to it lies a heavy tip of a spear 40 centimeters long. It is not always possible to determine the sex from the bones 100%, but in our case, archaeologists are sure. The pelvis of the skeleton is small, but experts are sure that the woman gave birth more than once. It is also clear from the skeleton that the woman is not young. The spear is too large to actually be used in combat, so it was more symbolic. But with stones, the story is more interesting. It is believed that huge stones were placed on a woman out of fear of her. People thought that in this way, it would save them from the fact that a woman could wake up to death. There were interesting things with the man too. It can be seen that his neck was broken, and his legs were tied, which means he was hanged. It's more like a criminal. But to put a criminal and a half-warrior woman in one grave, who would need it? There was an assumption that this was a servant of a woman before they did a DNA test of the period. It turned out to be even more confusing. The woman and the man were relatives, mother and son. It turns out we have found the true cause of fear of this woman. They threw stones at her so that she could not get up from the grave and avenge the death of her son. And the heavy tip of the spear was most likely a witch's stick. You might think that this is complete nonsense, but there is an explanation and coincidence for this in an ancient saga written in the 13th century. The saga tells the story of the sorceress Katla, and her son Ot was a criminal, but no one could injure or kill him, neither with a knife nor with an axe, because he was protected by the witchcraft of his mother. She hid his son at home and turned him into a dog or a pig. But another sorceress appeared who was able to expose them. As a result, the son was hanged right in front of the mother, and the mother was stoned, but she managed to curse her killers. The coincidence is very interesting. Were archaeologists really able to find real evidence of the ancient saga? If myth and sagas can be real stories, what about the Golden Boy from Egypt? Magic protection of the Golden Boy. It seems to us that any find from ancient Egypt will immediately get to the scientists who study it. But this is not always the case. Our story began back in 1916, when archaeologists found a mummified golden boy in an ancient cemetery in the town of Nagal Qusay in southern Egypt. The mummy was taken to the basement of the Egyptian museum, and all this time no one touched it. And just the other day, they decided to scan the boy. Why this was not done before is not clear. Perhaps it was simply not noticed, although it is very difficult not to notice the mummy of a child, completely covered in golden jewelry. The very fact of such decoration tells us that the boy was not a mere mortal. To protect the mummy from destruction, scientists used computed tomography. So, they managed to find out that the boy had magical protection. In the fabrics with which the boy was wrapped, scientists examined 49 amulets of various types. According to historians, these amulets not only helped to save the disease in the afterlife, but also had the properties to resurrect the boy from the dead. These were amulets made in the form of the Eye of Horus, scarabs, the Knot of Isis. There was also an amulet, a cod in the form of the rising sun. Many of them are made of gold, and some of them are made of semi-precious stones, backed clay or faience. In addition to the amulets, there was another peculiarity. The boy was buried in 2 coffins at once. There were Greek inscriptions on the outer sarcophagus. The boy was mummified according to the customs of that time. The internal organs were removed, and instead of the brain there was resin. A golden mask was also seen on him. He was shot in white sandals and decorated with a fern garland, which was of great spiritual significance. According to the Book of the Dead, the white sandals were meant for the boy to get out of the coffin. From the mysterious golden mummy of a teenager, let's move on to strange exhibits in museums. The strangest museum exhibits. The museum is the place where, in general, all the finds of archaeologists fall, where anyone can take a closer look at them. I will tell you about such exhibits more. The photo shows the upper body of an ancient Celt who was sacrificed almost 2,000 years ago. At the time of death, the guy was about 20 years old. They killed him rather harshly, although at that time such a death was a sign of special mercy. Before the sacrifice, his nipples were cut off. He was cut into pieces and burnt. Another thing is interesting. The guy had very well-groomed nails, which means that he was someone from the ruling elite. Severe gulls thus sacrificed the leader when his term of office approached, and 20 years for the leader was considered the sunset of a career. This lamb on wheels is at least 150 years old. It is creepy not only by its appearance, but also by the legend that it has acquired during its stay in the museum. The staff of the Canadian Museum considers the lamb cursed and assures that they hear sounds at night. How his chariot creaks, and the watchmen go crazy with fear. Turn on loud music so as not to hear how the lamb moves around the museum. Of course, this is most likely a local horror story. But this toy still looks creepy. And this is the real heart of a sheep, no longer a toy. It is completely studded with pins, nails, and needles. And this heart played a very important role. It protected its owner from enemies. To be honest, I don't quite understand how such a creepy and nasty piece of meat with pins can protect from enemies. Maybe it's because I'm not good at magic. This bone is considered ritual in Tibetan Buddhism. It's not as simple as you might think. This bone with a knob is capable of making an amazing sound. This bone, like the previous amulet, is also capable of scaring away evil spirits. The material for its production is the human tibia bone, but it is believed that the bones of girls are better suited for this. Ancient chariots in China. A long time ago in China, archaeologists found an amazing treasure: 5 ancient chariots with horses and 7 graves, with people under them. It was a burial place around the 1st millennium BC, at the end of the Bronze Age. Horses were very important animals for the people of that time, and they used them to move quickly and make connections with other cultures. All horses were adult males between 9 and 12 years old, and were used in chariots as draft animals. Perhaps they were trained for chariot riding from a young age. When horses were in their prime, they were buried with dead people as a ritual. This amazing find helps us learn more about ancient cultures and their attitude towards horses and chariots. But not only did archaeologists do this, they also found evidence that horses were used in funerary rituals with or without chariots, which became especially during the Zhou era, 11th to 3rd centuries BC. During excavations at the Shiji archaeological site in Gansu province, scientists found a pit with chariots and horses. They dated this object to the 7th to 6th centuries. Once a strange and terrible event happened in the history of the Catholic Church. Pope Stephen VI decided to hold a trial against his predecessor, Pope Formosus. But there was one problem. Formosus had already died and been buried for a year. Incredible. But Stephen VI nevertheless decided on this. He ordered Formosus' body to be taken from the grave, dressed in papal robes, and placed on a throne in one of the most famous churches in Rome. And then began the trial, which became known as the Cadaver Synod, or Trial of the Dead, since Formosus naturally couldn't speak and defend himself. A man sat behind him, who pretended to be his voice. As a result, the dead pope was accused of all sins and punished. They cut off the fingers on his right hand, dragged his body on the horse across Rome, and threw it into the river. I want to remind you that all this happened to an already dead person. But Pope Stephen VI could not long rejoice at such an outcome. People were outraged by such a terrible action, and soon a rebellion began. Stephen was sent to prison, where he was eventually killed. Subsequently, another pope, John IX, forbade trying the dead so that this would never happen again. And the body of Formosus was found by the monks, and he was buried again already with due respect in St. Peter's Cathedral. So even the most important people in history can sometimes do terrible and strange things. Write your opinion in the comments. Don't you think that there are too many terrible scandals associated with the Catholic Church in their entire history? And what could be the reason for this? The find more valuable than gold and silver? Amazing finds are sometimes found in ancient Egyptian tombs, standing on a pile with gold and silver. One such example is the work chest with tools found in the tomb of the carpenter Ankaf, located in a necropolis near Asyut, in central Egypt. On the box was an inscription dedicated to Anubis, the lord of Kirir, and an indication of the name of Ankaf. On the side of the chest was also a list of the tools that should have been contained inside: 6 axes, 6 adzes, 6 chisels, and 6 other tools with copper plates, possibly saws. However, the contents of the box turn out to be different: 7 adzes, 5 chisels, and no saws. The contradiction between the list and the contents is explained by the fact that the entire chest and tools are only models. The box is 18 centimeters long, while the miniature axes are only 15 centimeters long. These are symbolic tools intended for use only in the world of the dead, where Amketh continued to work as a carpenter for his great master, the Pharaoh of Egypt. Much more important than the context of the chest itself was the inscription on its side, which served as a kind of spell. The find dates from the Middle Kingdom, approximately 1981–1802 BC. The material of the box is limestone wood covered with a layer of lime. This exhibit is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, serving as an example of amazing artifacts that testify to the beliefs and customs of the ancient Egyptians. Mommy's hand with a coin. A child's mummified hand holding a copper coin is a unique find that has puzzled scientists and opened up new horizons for research of mummification and the use of copper as an antimicrobial agent. Discovered in 02 of 2005 in an abandoned cemetery in Yarlarinka, Hungary. This find has aroused wide interest among specialists. An analysis by a team of researchers found that copper contaminated on the infant's body contributed to soft tissue preservation. This was the first recorded case of copper-induced mummification. Scholars were also interested in the fact that the coin was in circulation in the middle of the 19th century, although the burial took place in a cemetery abandoned many years earlier. Such a find was an example of a unique case of mummification using copper, which may attract the attention of researchers and archaeologists in the future. This discovery provides an opportunity to expand our knowledge of ancient civilizations, their traditions and customs, as well as the use of various materials and methods to preserve the dead. Scientists have to study more cases like this to understand how copper and other materials were used in mummification, and what were the beliefs and practices of ancient cultures associated with this process. Grave of the mysterious surgeon in Hungary. Archaeologists have discovered a tomb of a mysterious man dating back to the 1st century AD, in which a set of high-quality surgical instruments was found. This discovery was made near the town of Yazberin, located in the center of the country, where researchers initially excavated in search of artifacts from the Copper Age. With the help of magnetometric surveys, archaeologists were able to discover a long-abandoned cemetery of the 6th–9th centuries AD, and began to excavate several rows of graves. One of the graves turned out to be older than the others, and dates back to the 1st century AD. This burial was shallow, and contained the remains of a man who died between the ages of 50 and 60. The researchers were surprised by the presence of metal instruments in the grave, which they were able to identify as Roman surgical instruments. The tools were hidden in 2 wooden chests buried at the feet of the deceased. Scientists note that the tools found had a very high-quality workmanship. The set featured tools such as tweezers, scalpels, needles, and even the ancient pliers. They were made of copper alloy, decorated with silver inlay, and had removable, replaceable steel blades. A small stone mortar was also found in the grave. The wear on its surface indicates that it was often used, possibly for making medicines. Such medical kits are extremely rare in the ancient Roman world, and this may be the first such find made on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. Who the buried man was, one can only guess, as well as about the cause of his death. Analysis of the bones revealed no visible signs of injury or disease. In the grave itself, there were no things or objects that could reliably indicate the origin of this person. Therefore, scientists do not know whether this ancient surgeon was a local resident or he came here from afar. However, it is planned to conduct a DNA analysis, which may help to solve this mystery. Archaeologists also know that such a medical kit at that time was extremely expensive. Only a very wealthy person could afford to buy it. The presence of such a set may indicate the high status of the disease and his professional skills. Perhaps he was one of the best surgeons of his time, and his knowledge and experience were very valuable. Ritual mask in Japan. Archaeologists have discovered a unique wooden mask from the 3rd century in the ruins of Nishiwata, Osaka Prefecture, Japan. Researchers believe that the mask was used in ceremonial rituals during agricultural festivals around 1800 years ago, during the Yayoi era. This find is one of 3 wooden masks found from this period. The mask, carved from cedar, measures 30 centimeters high and 18 centimeters wide, with holes for the eyes and mouth, and holes in the sides for ties. It was found at a depth of 3 meters, next to a wooden bucket for water and a burnt tool that looked like a mattock. These items may have been used in agriculture